This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to our exploration of human evolution, a story far more fascinating and complex than you might imagine. For decades, we've pictured our origins as a simple ladder, climbing steadily from ape to human. But the truth is wonderfully messier. Our family tree is more like a bush, with multiple branches growing, intertwining, and sometimes dying out. Join us as we discover how numerous human species once walked the earth together, challenging everything we thought we knew about what it means to be human. Chapter 1. The March of Progress Illusion. Picture a T-shirt worn by a high school marching band member. Emblazoned across the chest is a familiar sequence. A stooped, hairy figure on the left, hunched over and primitive-looking. Moving rightward, the figures gradually straighten, lose their body hair, and develop more refined features. The final figure stands fully upright, proudly holding a musical instrument. The message is clear, intuitive, and deeply wrong. This image, often called the March of Progress, has become one of the most recognizable icons in all of science. You have seen variations of it countless times. On bumper stickers, the sequence ends with a figure hunched over a computer keyboard, making a joke about modern posture. In advertisements, it concludes with someone riding a bicycle or wearing a business suit. Museums have displayed it. Textbooks have reproduced it. Political cartoons have satirized it. The image transcends scientific illustration to become cultural shorthand for the very concept of progress itself. Yet this ubiquitous representation fundamentally misrepresents how evolution actually works. The straight line from ape to human suggests inevitability, improvement, and purpose, none of which characterize the evolutionary process. Understanding why this image persists despite being scientifically inaccurate requires examining both its historical roots and its psychological appeal. The origins of this linear thinking extend deep into Western intellectual history, predating Charles Darwin by more than 2 millennia. The ancient Greeks, particularly Plato and Aristotle, conceived of nature as organized hierarchically in what became known as the Great Chain of Being, or in Latin, the Scala Naturae. This worldview arranged all beings on Earth, both animate and inanimate, according to an increasing scale of perfection. Mushrooms occupied the bottom rungs. Lobsters and rabbits sat higher. Human beings perched at the very top of the earthly realm, just below angels and divine beings. This hierarchical view made 3 fundamental claims about nature. First, that nature possesses inherent organization, rather than representing a random assortment of beings. Second, that 2 organizing principles governed this arrangement. Things progress from simple to perfect and from primitive to modern. Third, that no intermediary stages exist between levels in this hierarchy. Each level constituted a watertight compartment of similar complexity. A barnacle and a coral reef on the same rung were considered equally complex, with nothing existing halfway between adjacent steps. For nearly 2,000 years, this framework shaped how educated people in the West understood the natural world. The Scala Naturae fit comfortably with religious teachings about divine creation and humanity's special place in that creation. It provided certainty about nature's order and humanity's elevated position within it. When the first fossils of early humans began emerging from the earth in the 19th and 20th centuries, this ancient mental model lay ready to interpret them. The discovery of Neanderthal remains in the mid-19th century presented the first major challenge to comfortable assumptions about human uniqueness. The initial Neanderthal skull, found in 1856, sparked fierce debate. Critics dismissed it as merely the skull of a degenerate modern human, or perhaps a Cossack soldier who died during the Napoleonic Wars. The notion that humans might share ancestry with more primitive-looking beings disturbed the prevailing worldview. It would take years before scientists accepted Neanderthals as an ancient branch of the human family. Even when Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, the linear mindset persisted. Darwin himself included only one illustration in his revolutionary book, a branching tree diagram showing how species split and diverged over time. This image represented his understanding that evolution proceeds through branching, not through linear succession. Yet the scala naturae remained so deeply embedded in Victorian thinking that many of Darwin's contemporaries struggled to abandon it entirely. An influential illustration from 1882 demonstrates how quickly the linear model reasserted itself. Artist Edward Linley Sambourne created a cartoon for the magazine Punch titled "Man is but a Worm." The illustration showed a humorous progression from worm to fish to monkey to ape to human, each figure slightly more upright and refined than the last. Though meant as satire, the cartoon's enormous popularity helped cement a profoundly misleading conception in the public mind. It combined Darwin's concept of gradual change with the old idea of linear progression, creating something Darwin never intended, a ladder of improvement leading inexorably to humanity. This fusion of gradualism with linearity proved remarkably persistent. Throughout the 20th century, as more hominin fossils emerged from African soils, scientists and educators repeatedly arranged them in straight lines. Museum displays positioned casts of skulls in neat rows, moving from small-brained Australopithecines through various Homo species to modern humans. The arrangement suggested an orderly sequence, one form giving way to the next in predictable fashion. For students learning about human evolution in classrooms during the mid-20th century, the story seemed refreshingly simple. One could trace a clear path from Australopithecines to Homo habilis to Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. Each species appeared to represent a step forward, a rung climbed on the ladder toward modern humanity. Late-night cramming sessions before anthropology exams benefited from this apparent simplicity. Memorize the sequence, remember which species came when, and you understood human evolution. This orderly narrative served multiple psychological and cultural needs. It reassured people that human existence followed a comprehensible pattern. It suggested that evolution had direction and purpose, even if scientists claimed otherwise. Most importantly, it placed modern humans at the pinnacle of a long process of improvement, confirming cherished beliefs about human superiority and special status. The linear model told us what we wanted to hear, that we represent the inevitable culmination of evolutionary progress. The appeal of this narrative extended beyond mere vanity. It aligned with everyday experience of technological and social progress. Just as tools improved from stone axes to smartphones, and transportation advanced from horses to automobiles to airplanes, so too, it seemed, did human biology advance from primitive to sophisticated forms. The March of Progress image mapped neatly onto modern notions of advancement and development. Popular culture embraced and amplified this framework. Caveman movies portrayed our ancestors as brutish, dim-witted, and barely articulate. Museum reconstructions showed Neanderthals as stooped, excessively hairy, and primitive. These depictions had little basis in evidence, but much basis in the assumption that earlier meant worse, more primitive, less worthy. The scala naturae lived on, now dressed in the language of evolution. Even the terminology scientists employed reflected linear thinking. Researchers spoke of archaic versus modern humans, with the clear implication that modern represented an improvement. They debated which fossil species lay on the direct line leading to us, treating side branches as failed experiments or evolutionary dead ends. The metaphor of a family tree reinforced these assumptions, a single trunk rising steadily upward, representing the main line of progress, with unsuccessful offshoots branching away and terminating. Yet the fossil evidence itself, when examined carefully, never truly supported this tidy linear model. By the late 1970s, scientists recognized that multiple Australopithecine species had coexisted in Africa, not succeeded one another in sequence. Different hominin forms lived at the same times in the same regions, each pursuing its own evolutionary path. The single trunk began looking more like multiple parallel branches. The psychological grip of linear thinking manifests in how discoveries continue to be reported. Almost every significant fossil find in paleoanthropology gets announced as surprising. Scientists express astonishment that the new evidence complicates rather than clarifies the picture. Yet, if we possess only 5 pieces of a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, every new piece added will likely change how we understand the emerging image. Why should we be surprised that our understanding shifts when we have merely a minuscule residue of our long and diverse past? Consider what happens in an actual jigsaw puzzle when you have very few pieces. You might place 3 pieces together and believe you understand the picture. It's clearly an image of the sky. Then you add another piece showing green grass, and suddenly you must revise your understanding. The picture includes both sky and ground. Add a piece with a human figure, and the picture transforms again. Each addition changes the whole until enough pieces accumulate to reveal the full complexity of the scene. Human evolution presents exactly this situation, except we will never have most of the pieces. Fossilization requires specific conditions that rarely occur. Soft tissues vanish, leaving only bones and teeth. Many hominin species may have left no fossil trace whatsoever. The pieces we do possess represent a tiny, biased sample of the full diversity that once existed. Yet the linear model persists in public understanding, despite scientific consensus moving away from it. Museum gift shops still sell T-shirts showing the march from ape to human. Advertisements still use the progression as visual shorthand for improvement and advancement. Political commentary still employs the image to suggest that certain groups or behaviors represent evolutionary steps backward. This persistence reveals something important about how scientific understanding and popular culture interact. Scientific knowledge may advance through careful evaluation of evidence, but popular understanding often changes more slowly, held back by the psychological comfort of familiar frameworks. The March of Progress image provides that comfort. It assures us that evolution has direction, that change means improvement, and that humans represent the highest achievement of the process. Breaking free from this misconception requires more than simply stating that it's wrong. It demands new mental models that can accommodate the messiness and contingency of actual evolutionary history. It requires accepting that evolution has no foresight, no plan, no ultimate goal. Species do not climb toward perfection. They adapt to immediate circumstances or they perish. Success means survival and reproduction, nothing more. It also requires abandoning the assumption that earlier equals inferior. A Neanderthal was not a failed attempt at becoming human. It was a successful human species in its own right, thriving in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. Its eventual disappearance, approximately 40,000 years ago, does not indicate inferiority, any more than the extinction of countless other successful species throughout Earth's history indicates their failure. The Scala Naturae promised us a comprehensible universe with clear hierarchies and purposes. The March of Progress image adapted that promise for the modern age, suggesting that evolution, despite lacking conscious direction, still produces ordered advancement toward us. Neither promise holds. Evolution produces diversity, experimentation, and frequent dead ends. It creates intricate adaptations to specific circumstances, not rungs on the universal ladder. Understanding this requires reimagining how we visualize evolutionary history. Instead of a ladder or a neat tree with a single trunk, we need to envision a dense, tangled bush. Branches grow in every direction. Some extend for long periods before terminating. Others split repeatedly, creating complex networks of relationships. There is no main trunk, no central line of advancement, no inevitable progression toward any particular endpoint. This more accurate visualization feels less satisfying than the march of progress. It offers no clear narrative arc, no reassuring sense of direction, no confirmation of human specialness. Perhaps this discomfort explains why the linear model maintains its grip on popular imagination despite scientific rejection. We prefer stories with clear beginnings, middles, and triumphant endings. Evolution provides no such story. Yet embracing the complexity offers its own rewards. The bushy, tangled reality of human evolution reveals a far richer story than any linear progression could tell. It shows experimentation and diversity, success and extinction, adaptation to countless different environments and circumstances. It demonstrates that the human story has never simple or inevitable, but rather contingent on innumerable chance events and environmental changes. Most importantly, abandoning the linear model opens us to recognizing that modern humans represent just one outcome among many possibilities that evolution explored. We are not the pinnacle of anything, not the goal toward which evolution aimed, not the measure against which other species should be judged. We are one species, currently successful, but whose long-term survival remains as uncertain as that of any other species that evolution has produced. This shift in understanding carries implications beyond academic debates about hominin phylogeny. It challenges us to reconsider assumptions about progress, improvement, and the direction of change. If evolution provides no template for inevitable advancement, perhaps neither does human history more broadly. The linear model has shaped not just how we think about biological evolution, but how we imagine historical change, social development, and our own future trajectory. Letting go of the march of progress image means accepting that we have not climbed to the top of any ladder. We simply stand where we stand, products of a long, branching, contingent process that could have produced very different outcomes under slightly different circumstances. That realization may feel less comfortable than believing ourselves the culmination of evolutionary progress, but it has the considerable advantage of being true. Chapter 2. The Branching Bush of Human Evolution. Stand at the edge of a dense thicket on a hillside. Not the orderly rows of an apple orchard with trees planted at regular intervals along straight lines, but a wild tangle of shrubs pushing upward in every direction. Some branches reach high before stopping abruptly. Others split and split again, creating intricate webs of wood. Still others grow sideways before turning upward, or intertwine with neighboring branches. No single trunk dominates. No clear vertical line rises from soil to sky. This chaotic, exuberant tangle captures the reality of human evolution far better than any neat ladder ever could. Yet for much of the 20th century, scientists expected to find simplicity. This expectation had deep roots in professional anthropology, not just popular culture. In 1971, paleoanthropologist Milford Wolpoff formally articulated what became known as the single-species hypothesis. This view held that at any given time, only one hominin species could have existed because all hominins filled essentially the same ecological niche. The reasoning seemed logical. If two closely related species competed for identical resources in identical ways, one would inevitably exclude the other. Therefore, the various fossils being discovered must represent a single lineage evolving through time, not multiple coexisting branches. This hypothesis shaped how researchers interpreted fossils for years. When they found specimens that looked different, they assumed these represented earlier and later stages of the same lineage, not contemporary alternatives. The single-species hypothesis wasn't fringe thinking. It appeared in textbooks and influenced museum displays. It provided a comfortable framework that made the fragmentary fossil records seem manageable and comprehensible. But evidence accumulated that couldn't be squeezed into this framework. By 1976, Sherwood Washburn and Russell Chachon had dismantled the single-species hypothesis, with data showing that multiple Australopithecine species clearly coexisted in East Africa. The old model collapsed, yet its influence lingered in the assumption that human evolution must have followed some orderly pattern, even if not quite as simple as a single lineage. Before the late 1970s, the hominin fossil record was sparse enough that one could almost maintain such orderly thinking. Lucy, the famous Australopithecus afarensis skeleton discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, seemed to fit neatly as an ancestor to later forms. Her species, living between 3.9 and 2.9 million years ago, appeared to stand alone in that time period, a single stem from which later branches would grow. Stephen Jay Gould, with characteristic prescience, anticipated what was coming. In 1976, he wrote in Natural History magazine, "We know about 3 coexisting branches of the human bush, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Australopithecus boisei. I will be surprised if twice as many more are not discovered before the end of the century." His prediction proved remarkably accurate. As more teams began searching more sites across Africa, and as new dating techniques allowed more precise age estimates for fossils, discoveries multiplied. The single stem exploded into many branches, some growing alongside each other for hundreds of thousands of years. Today, scientists recognize at least 21 different species within the genus Homo and related lineages. This number continues to grow. In 2015, researchers announced Homo naledi, found deep within a South African cave system. In 2019, they described Homo luzonensis from the Philippines. Each discovery adds another branch to an already crowded bush, forcing researchers to reconsider relationships and revise their understanding of which species lived when and where. This multiplication of recognized species raises a profound question. How much diversity remains undiscovered? In 1990, primatologist R.D. Martin estimated that only 3% of past taxonomic diversity in primate paleocommunities has been documented in the fossil record. Applied to hominins, with roughly 12 known extinct species, this staggering statistic suggests potentially 400 hominin species may have existed. 400! Even if Martin's estimate errs on the conservative side, the implication is clear. We possess merely glimpses of what was once a far fuller bush. The fragmentary nature of our knowledge stems from the requirements of fossilization. Bones must be buried quickly in the right sediments. They must avoid scavengers and weathering. Chemical conditions must favor preservation rather than dissolution. For millions of years of hominin evolution across vast African and Eurasian landscapes, only the tiniest fraction of individuals who lived ever became fossils. Of those fossils, only a fraction have been discovered. Of those discovered, only a fraction have been properly studied and described. We are not looking at a comprehensive catalog, but at scattered samples, lucky accidents of preservation and discovery. Consider the situation at Dramanesy, a small town in the Republic of Georgia where an astonishing cache of early Homo fossils was unearthed. This site yielded 5 remarkably complete skulls, all dating to about 1.8 million years ago, all clearly from the same population. Yet these 5 skulls show striking variation. Some are larger, some smaller. Some have pronounced brow ridges, others less so. The face shapes differ considerably. One skull, from an elderly individual who had lost all but one tooth years before death, shows evidence that the individual survived long after becoming unable to chew properly, suggesting care by other group members. When researchers compared the variation among these 5 Dramanesy skulls to the variation among African fossils of similar age traditionally assigned to 3 different species, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and Homo rudolfensis, they found something remarkable. The variation within the single Dramanesy population matched the entire variation across all 3 African species. This suggested that what paleontologists had been calling 3 separate species might actually represent natural variation within a single variable species. This finding doesn't simplify the bushy tree. It does, however, remind us that the tree's exact branching pattern remains uncertain. Some branches might merge upon closer examination. Others might split when researchers discover new evidence. The bush might have slightly fewer or more branches than currently recognized. What remains clear is that the pattern is bushy, not linear, that multiple forms coexisted, and that diversity characterized most periods of human evolution. Picture East Africa 2 million years ago. In the woodlands and grasslands, multiple forms of Australopithecines still persist, representing different solutions to surviving in varied environments. Meanwhile, early members of Homo explore different strategies. Homo habilis makes and uses simple stone tools, crude choppers, and flakes struck from river cobbles. These tools give access to new food sources, meat scavenged from carnivore kills, bones cracked open for marrow, tough plant foods sliced into manageable pieces. The smaller teeth and jaws of Homo habilis reflect this technological assistance with food processing. At the same time, Homo erectus has already appeared, with its larger brain and more sophisticated tools. This species will eventually spread beyond Africa, becoming the first hominin to colonize Eurasia. But for now, multiple versions of humanity share the African landscape, each occupying its own niche, each representing a viable solution to the challenges of survival. The robust Australopithecines, those heavy-jawed specialists, persisted long after the first Homo species appeared, following their own evolutionary trajectories for over 1 million years before eventually going extinct without leaving descendants. Their extinction does not indicate failure any more than the extinction of dinosaurs indicates theirs. They thrived for immense spans of time before changing circumstances ended their run. Even within the genus Homo, diversity flourished. Homo erectus, that great wanderer, spread across the Old World and persisted for nearly 2 million years, an astonishing record of success. But it didn't do so as a single, unchanging form. Populations in different regions developed distinctive features. Some researchers recognize several subspecies: Homo erectus erectus in Asia, Homo erectus georgicus in the Caucasus, and Homo ergaster in Africa, though debates continue about whether these represent truly separate species or merely geographic variants of a single widespread species. Homo naledi, announced in 2015, presents a striking example of how the bush defies simple progressions. Found in the Dinaledi chamber of South Africa's Rising Star Cave, this species combines primitive and modern features in unexpected ways. Its brain was small, about the size of an orange. Its shoulders and curved fingers suggested climbing ability. Yet its hands were capable of precision grips, and its feet were virtually indistinguishable from those of modern humans. Dating placed it between 335 and 236,000 years ago. The Rising Star Cave system yielded over 1,500 fossil specimens from at least 15 individuals, the richest single hominin fossil site ever discovered. The bones lay deep within the cave system, in a chamber accessible only through narrow vertical passages. How they got there remains debated, but the concentration of hominin remains with few other animal bones suggests deliberate disposal of bodies, a behavior previously thought exclusive to larger brain species. The discovery of Homo floresiensis on the Indonesian island of Flores in 2003 added a particularly striking branch to the bush. This tiny hominin, standing barely over 1 meter tall with a brain about the size of a grapefruit, lived until approximately 50,000 years ago. Its small size likely resulted from island dwarfism, an evolutionary process where large animals evolve smaller bodies when isolated on islands with limited resources. Many species show this pattern. Flores also hosted dwarf elephants and giant rats, an entire miniaturized ecosystem. What makes Homo floresiensis so significant for understanding the bushy tree is its late survival. Here was a small-brained hominin with features reminiscent of much earlier species living at the same time as anatomically modern humans with brains 3 times the size. If evolution proceeded along a ladder of increasing brain size and sophistication, how could this be? The answer: evolution doesn't work that way. Different lineages adapt to different circumstances. In the isolated environment of Flores, selection favored small body size. Brain size followed, shrinking along with the rest of the body. Understanding this bushy pattern changes how we interpret human evolutionary history. Instead of seeing a single lineage inexorably progressing toward us, we recognize a radiation of experiments, a diversification into different forms adapted to different niches. Some lineages specialized for processing tough plant foods. Others emphasized tool use and meat eating. Some remained small, others grew large. Some stayed in Africa, others spread across continents. This radiation resembles what we see in other successful groups of organisms. When mammals diversified after the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago, they didn't follow a single line of advancement. They exploded into thousands of forms, some that flew, some that swam, some that burrowed, some that grew enormous, others that stayed tiny. Each found its own way to make a living. The human family shows the same pattern, though on a smaller scale and compressed into a shorter time period. The bushy pattern also means that evolutionary success cannot be measured by whether a lineage leads to us. Many extinct hominin species persisted for well over 1 million years, far longer than Homo sapiens has yet existed. By that measure, they were remarkably successful. That they eventually went extinct and left no descendants doesn't retroactively make them failures. Extinction is the eventual fate of all species. Evolutionary success means thriving for a time, adapting effectively to current circumstances, and persisting through changing conditions for as long as possible. This perspective liberates us from seeing human evolution as a story with ourselves as the inevitable heroes. We are not the goal, not the purpose, not the measure of success or failure. We are one outcome among many that evolution produced, currently doing well, but holding no guarantee of long-term survival. Homo erectus lasted nearly 2 million years. We've managed only 300,000 so far. Whether we'll match erectus's endurance remains to be seen. The bushy tree also reveals the role of chance in human evolution. The Homo sapiens lineage nearly went extinct several times. Genetic studies suggest population bottlenecks, periods when our ancestors dwindled to perhaps just a few thousand individuals. Different circumstances, a slightly different roll of evolution's dice, and we might not be here. One of the other branches might have survived instead, perhaps Neanderthals, or a lineage we haven't yet discovered in the fossil record. This contingency matters. It reminds us that evolution has no foresight, no plan, no destination in mind. The organisms alive at any moment represent whatever happened to survive so far, not what evolution intended to produce. We cannot read purpose into the pattern. The bush grew as it grew, shaped by immediate circumstances, by accidents of geography and climate, by chance events that elevated some lineages and doomed others. The branches sometimes even reconnected through interbreeding, creating patterns of relationship more complex than any simple tree could capture. Looking at the human evolutionary bush in its full complexity, we see something far richer than any linear progression could offer. We see experimentation, diversity, adaptation to myriad circumstances. We see evolutionary dead ends, yes, but we also see remarkable success stories, lineages that thrived for ages before circumstances changed. We see evidence that there is no single right way to be human, that evolution tried many variations on the theme, that different solutions worked in different times and places. Most importantly, we see our own species in proper context. One twig on a bush that was once far fuller, one experiment among many, currently successful, but ultimately as contingent and temporary as any other species that evolution has produced. That humbling perspective offers a more accurate, more scientifically grounded, and ultimately more interesting understanding of where we come from and what we are than any march of progress ever could. The human family tree is not an orderly orchard with neat rows leading inexorably to us. It is that wild hillside thicket, dense and tangled, exuberant in its branching, each stem pursuing its own direction until conditions changed and growth ceased. We stand on one branch still growing, surrounded by the dried remnants of countless others, all part of the same chaotic, beautiful tangle that is the story of human evolution. Chapter 3. Walking the Same Shore. Imagine walking along a muddy lakeshore in what is now northern Kenya, 1.5 million years ago. The sun beats down on the shallow waters of Lake Turkana. You leave footprints in the soft sediment as you move along the shore, perhaps searching for freshwater mussels or edible reeds. Within hours, maybe within minutes, another figure walks across the same patch of mud, leaving different footprints made by a different kind of human. The mud hardens, sediment buries it, and 1.5 million years later, researchers excavate this surface and find both sets of footprints frozen in time, direct evidence that two human species shared the same landscape at the same moment. This is not speculation. In July 2021, a team led by paleontologist Luis Leakey uncovered exactly such a surface near Lake Turkana. A Kenyan field assistant named Richard Loki spotted the first print, a deep impression in hardened sediment that clearly showed the outline of a hominin foot. Further excavation revealed a trackway of 12 footprints, showing the characteristic gait and foot anatomy of Paranthropus boisei. 3 isolated footprints nearby, showing different proportions and a different walking pattern, appear to have been made by Homo erectus. As Kevin Hatala, one of the researchers analyzing the tracks, explained, fossil footprints are exciting because they provide vivid snapshots that bring our fossil relatives to life. Unlike bones, which can wash downstream or be moved by scavengers, footprints capture an individual's actual presence at a specific location and moment. Craig Feibel, another team member, emphasized this crucial distinction. Trace fossils cannot be moved. This proves beyond any question that not only one, but 2 different hominins were walking on the same surface, literally within hours of each other. The geological context makes the timing unambiguous. The footprints formed in what researchers call the perfect zone of mud. Firm enough at the top to preserve clear impressions, but soft enough a few inches down to capture fine anatomical details. Experimental studies conducted on the modern Lake Turkana shoreline demonstrate that such conditions don't last long. Wave action destroys exposed mud surfaces within hours. The 2 sets of footprints were made within this narrow window, perhaps on the same day, certainly no more than a few days apart. Picture what this means. One individual walked along this shore heading in one direction. Shortly afterward, another individual crossed the same surface following a perpendicular path. They might have seen each other. They might have deliberately avoided each other. They might have passed without interaction, each focused on their own tasks. We cannot know. What we do know is that they were there, together, using the same habitat at the same moment. This discovery provides the first physical evidence of direct, contemporaneous occupation of the same immediate landscape by 2 different hominin species. Fossils from the same geological formation had long suggested temporal overlap, but bones found in the same rock layer can be separated by thousands of years. These footprints eliminate that uncertainty. 2 species, same place, same time. The Turkana Basin 1.5 million years ago was a dynamic landscape of rivers, wetlands, and seasonal flooding. The lake margin offered critical resources, water certainly, but also edible plants, freshwater clams and snails, perhaps fish, and animals coming to drink. For hominins without the ability to store or transport water, proximity to reliable sources would have been essential. But if both species needed access to the same critical resources, how did they coexist? Modern ecological theory predicts that when 2 species compete for identical resources in identical ways, one will eventually exclude the other. Yet Paranthropus boisei and Homo erectus overlapped in the Turkana Basin not for years or decades, but for hundreds of thousands of years. The answer lies in niche partitioning, the ecological mechanism whereby similar species divide resources, each specializing in different foods, habitats, or times of activity. The anatomical differences between these two species hint at how they partitioned their shared environment. Paranthropus bozai possessed massive molars, enormous chewing muscles, and robust jaws built for processing huge quantities of tough plant material. Analysis of wear patterns on their teeth indicates a diet heavy in sedges, grasses, and other hard fibrous plants. Homo erectus, by contrast, had smaller teeth and more gracile jaws. Evidence from other sites shows this species used stone tools to butcher animals and process foods. Their diet was more varied, including meat when available, softer plant foods, and items prepared using tools. Where Paranthropus boisei might have spent hours methodically chewing tough vegetation, Homo erectus could have been hunting, scavenging, or using tools to extract resources that Paranthropus couldn't easily access. The two species may also have partitioned their use of the lakeshore temporally. Perhaps one was more active during cooler morning and evening hours, while the other foraged during midday heat. Even within the same habitat at roughly the same time, subtle differences in behavior could have reduced direct competition enough to allow coexistence. The Turkana footprints are not isolated evidence. Analysis of other fossil footprint surfaces in the broader region reveals a pattern of two distinct types of hominin tracks appearing across multiple sites spanning 200,000 years. The same two species repeatedly visited lake margin habitats over this immense time period, suggesting this wasn't a brief overlap but a stable ecological relationship maintained across countless generations. Expanding the view beyond Lake Turkana, evidence of coexistence appears throughout the fossil record. At Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, fossils of Paranthropus boisei and early Homo appear in the same sedimentary layers dated to roughly 1.8 million years ago. At Swartkrans Cave in South Africa, remains of Paranthropus robustus, Homo erectus, and possibly another early Homo species all occur in deposits spanning from about 2 million to 1.5 million years ago. Moving forward in time, the pattern of multiple contemporaneous human species persists. Between 600,000 and 300,000 years ago, during the Middle Pleistocene, Africa and Eurasia hosted remarkable diversity. Homo heidelbergensis, or closely related forms, inhabited both continents, showing robust builds and brain sizes intermediate between earlier and later humans. During this same Middle Pleistocene period, early members of our own species began appearing in Africa. Fossils from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, dated to around 300,000 years ago, show a mosaic of modern and archaic features. These early Homo sapiens coexisted with other hominin populations across Africa, whose exact relationships remain debated, but whose presence is increasingly clear from both fossils and genetic evidence. In Eurasia, Neanderthals emerged as a distinct lineage, adapting to glacial environments with their robust, cold-adapted builds. They developed sophisticated stone and bone tools, used pigments, buried their dead, and created rich cultural traditions. Meanwhile, other archaic populations persisted in various regions, creating a patchwork of human diversity across the Old World. When anatomically modern humans began expanding out of Africa after about 100,000 years ago, they entered landscapes already occupied by other human species. The resulting encounters created patterns of alternating occupation and, as genetic evidence now demonstrates, occasional interbreeding. Evolution had not followed a single line leading to one inevitable outcome. Instead, it resembled what researchers increasingly call a braided stream, separate channels flowing apart, then merging back together, diverging and reconnecting repeatedly across the landscape of time. By 40,000 years ago, the situation in Eurasia had become remarkably complex. Neanderthals still inhabited their traditional territories across Europe and Western Asia, though their range was beginning to contract. Modern Homo sapiens had spread across Africa, the Middle East, and into Europe and Asia. Multiple distinct human species lived on Earth at the same time. Not in the distant past of millions of years ago, but in the relatively recent span of 40,000 years before present, a blink of an eye in geological terms. Our direct ancestors knew a world populated by other kinds of humans. The question of how these coexisting species interacted has fascinated researchers. Did they fight, trade, ignore each other? The archaeological record provides frustratingly few clear answers. At most sites, we find evidence of one species or another, not both together. Even when fossils of different species come from the same region and overlapping time periods, they typically don't appear in the same specific archaeological layers.
Yet hints of interaction emerge. The genetic evidence demonstrates that interbreeding occurred between modern humans, Neanderthals, and other archaic populations. But interbreeding doesn't necessarily imply peaceful coexistence. It requires only occasional mating, which could occur in many contexts. Some Neanderthal sites in Europe show changes in tool types and the appearance of ornaments like shell beads during the period when modern humans were present nearby, leading to debate about whether Neanderthals independently developed these innovations or adopted them after contact with modern humans. The evidence permits multiple interpretations, a reminder of how much we still don't know about the nature of encounters between different human species. The long duration of coexistence raises the question of how one species eventually replaced the others. If Neanderthals and modern humans both survived in overlapping ranges for 30,000 years or more, what finally tipped the balance? Climate played a crucial role. The late Pleistocene saw dramatic swings between glacial and interglacial periods. Each climate shift altered the distribution of resources, favored different adaptations, and put pressure on populations adapted to previous conditions. Some researchers suggest that small differences in cognitive ability or social organization gave modern humans advantages that accumulated over millennia. Perhaps modern human groups maintained larger social networks, allowing them to share information and resources across wider areas. Perhaps they had slightly more efficient hunting techniques or could extract nutrition from a wider range of foods. Small advantages, compounded over thousands of generations, could eventually lead one species to expand while others contracted. Population growth rates matter enormously over long time periods. If modern human populations grew slightly faster than Neanderthal populations, then over hundreds of generations, modern humans would have expanded while Neanderthals declined, without requiring any direct conflict. Slower growing populations can be absorbed or isolated into ever smaller refugia until they disappear. Dating of Neanderthal sites across Europe suggests their disappearance happened gradually, generally progressing from east to west. Neanderthals vanished from most of their range by about 40,000 years ago, but isolated populations survived longer. In Gibraltar and other parts of southwestern Iberia, Neanderthal sites date to as recently as 28,000 years ago, making these areas among the last refugia where dwindling populations held on for several thousand years after the species had disappeared elsewhere. Paranthropus boisei presents a similar story of long success followed by eventual extinction. This species thrived in East Africa for over 1 million years, from 2.3 million years ago until about 1.2 million years ago. It coexisted with multiple other hominins throughout its tenure. Its specialized adaptations for processing tough plant foods served it well for 1 million years, far longer than Homo sapiens has yet existed. What caused its extinction? Climate change altered African environments dramatically during this period, with increasing aridity and shifts in vegetation patterns. The resources Paranthropus boisei depended on may have become scarcer or more patchily distributed. Competition from Homo species, with their more flexible tool-assisted diets, might have increased pressure. Or perhaps some combination of factors proved collectively overwhelming when they coincided. What the coexistence of multiple hominin species throughout human evolutionary history demonstrates most clearly is that there was never a single inevitable path to modern humans. At many points in our past, the world contained multiple viable solutions to the challenge of being human. Each strategy worked for a time, and several worked simultaneously, their ranges overlapping, their populations encountering each other along lake shores, in cave systems, across savanna grasslands. The braided stream of human evolution created patterns far more complex than any simple branching tree could capture. Understanding this complexity changes how we see ourselves. We are descendants of one of those experimental lineages, the one that happened to survive while others didn't. Not necessarily the best experiment, not necessarily the smartest or strongest, just the one that made it, for reasons we're still working to understand. The footprints at Lake Turkana capture this multiplicity in a single frozen moment. Two kinds of human walking the same shore, leaving different traces, neither knowing that the other represents a different species, a different experiment in being human. Those ancient impressions in hardened mud tell us something profound. The human story has always been plural, a story of multiple lineages sharing the world, each finding its own way to survive until circumstances changed and survival became impossible.
Chapter 4. The Braided Stream. In the basement laboratories of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, researchers faced a problem that seemed nearly insurmountable. Ancient DNA degrades. Time, moisture, and microbes chew apart the delicate double helix, fragmenting it into smaller and smaller pieces until almost nothing remains readable. Modern human DNA contaminates everything, floating in the air, on skin, in breath, settled in dust on every surface. Distinguishing genuine ancient genetic sequences from this ubiquitous modern contamination required extreme care, specialized cleanrooms, and techniques that bordered on forensic obsession. The work was painstaking, frustrating. Bone samples yielded mostly nothing. When they did produce readable sequences, the researchers had to verify again and again that what they were seeing wasn't contamination. Svante Pabo, the geneticist leading the effort, started with mitochondrial DNA because it was more abundant and therefore easier to recover from degraded samples. But the real prize would be nuclear DNA, the genetic material inherited from both parents that could reveal the full story of ancient relationships. What they discovered would overturn fundamental assumptions about human evolution and our relationship to extinct relatives. The findings, when they came, shocked many researchers who had long maintained that modern humans evolved separately, that we replaced archaic populations without mixing. The genetic evidence told a different story entirely. Think of a river system viewed from above. In some places, the water flows in a single broad channel. Elsewhere, it splits into multiple streams that run parallel for miles before merging back together. The streams separate and reconnect repeatedly, creating an intricate braided pattern across the landscape. This image captures human evolution far better than any simple tree ever could. As paleoanthropologist John Hawks put it, our evolutionary history is like a braided stream. Separate lineages flowed apart for hundreds of thousands of years, then came back together through interbreeding, their genetic streams merging and diverging in complex patterns we're only beginning to map. Understanding this braided pattern required first establishing where modern humans came from. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA from living populations had revealed that all humans today trace their maternal lineage to a woman who lived in Africa between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. The media inevitably called her Mitochondrial Eve, though the nickname sparked controversy. She wasn't the first woman, wasn't alone, wasn't uniquely special. She was simply the woman through whom all modern maternal lineages happen to pass, the most recent common maternal ancestor of everyone alive. Other women lived alongside her, but their maternal lines eventually died out. This finding strongly supported recent African origin of modern humans, but it left crucial questions unanswered. What happened when African emigrants encountered other human species in Eurasia? Did they simply replace them, or did the story get more complicated?
The first bombshell dropped in 2010. Pabo's team had painstakingly assembled nuclear genome sequences from 3 Neanderthal individuals found in Vingia Cave in Croatia. The bones, fragmentary and unpromising, had lain buried for 40,000 years.
Extracting enough undamaged DNA required processing multiple bone samples, each yielding only tiny amounts of usable genetic material. Contamination was a constant threat. Every step demanded meticulous protocols. When they finally had enough sequences to compare with modern human genomes, they found something that contradicted decades of scientific consensus. People of European, Asian, and Melanesian ancestry all carried small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, typically 1 to 4% of their total genome. People of sub-Saharan African descent showed no significant Neanderthal ancestry. The pattern was clear and shocking. Modern humans and Neanderthals had interbred. The number sounds small, 4%, but consider what that means in a genome of roughly 3 billion base pairs. 4% represents over 100 million positions where your DNA, if you have non-African ancestry, matches Neanderthal sequences rather than the modern human ancestral versions. These aren't random, meaningless variations scattered through chromosomes. Many are functional genes affecting how bodies work right now, today. Chris Stringer, a paleoanthropologist at the Natural History Museum in London who had long championed the replacement model, found himself among those forced to revise fundamental assumptions. The data is strong, he acknowledged. Not only had interbreeding occurred, but the offspring were successful enough that their genes persist in billions of people today. Some Neanderthal genes influence immune systems. This makes evolutionary sense. Neanderthals had lived in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years, encountering local pathogens, developing immune responses adapted to those specific challenges. When modern humans arrived from Africa, they faced new disease threats. Human leukocyte antigen alleles from Neanderthals represent more than half such variants in modern Eurasians, indicating strong positive selection. Acquiring these immune genes through interbreeding was like getting vaccinated against local diseases. Other Neanderthal genes affect skin and hair. Variants associated with skin pigmentation, adaptations to lower UV radiation at higher latitudes, came from Neanderthals. The physical characteristics often thought quintessentially modern human actually came from extinct relatives who got there first. The timing appears brief in evolutionary terms. Most Neanderthal gene flow into modern humans occurred between 45,000 and 80,000 years ago, probably in the Middle East where the two species overlapped, after modern humans left Africa, but before they dispersed widely across Eurasia. This means interbreeding happened early in the modern human expansion, and those Neanderthal sequences then spread with populations colonizing new territories. But the pattern proved more complex than a single event. People of East Asian descent consistently showed 15 to 30% more Neanderthal ancestry than Europeans. If all non-Africans inherited Neanderthal DNA from the same initial Middle Eastern encounter, why would East Asians have more? The answer, a second wave of interbreeding. After modern humans split into populations ancestral to Europeans and East Asians, the East Asian lineage experienced additional gene flow from Neanderthals somewhere in their migration route across Asia. The braided stream was revealing its complexity. While researchers processed the Neanderthal findings, another discovery emerged from Denisova Cave in Siberia's Altai Mountains. Excavators found a tiny finger bone fragment from a juvenile. Barely larger than a pea, it seemed unpromising. But the cool, stable cave climate had preserved DNA remarkably well. When researchers sequenced DNA from this fragment in 2010, they expected it to match either modern humans or Neanderthals. It matched neither. This was a third lineage, previously unknown from fossils, as genetically distinct from Neanderthals as Neanderthals were from modern humans. A few teeth found later in the cave also yielded DNA from the same mysterious group. The teeth were enormous, as large as those of Australopithecines that lived millions of years earlier. These Denisovans, as they became known, raised immediate questions. If this was a distinct species, where else did they live?
The Altai Mountains seemed unlikely territory for an entire species. Researchers searched for Denisovan DNA in living populations. They found it in unexpected places, not in Europeans or most Asians, but in Melanesians, indigenous peoples of Papua New Guinea and nearby Pacific Islands. Some Melanesian populations carry up to 5 or 6% Denisovan ancestry, higher than typical Neanderthal percentages anywhere. Aboriginal Australians also carry Denisovan DNA, as do some Southeast Asian populations. This distribution pattern suggested Denisovans ranged across Asia from Siberia south through Southeast Asia into Oceania. Modern humans must have encountered and interbred with them multiple times in different places. One Denisovan gene tells a remarkable story. Tibetans and other high-altitude Himalayan populations carry a variant of the EPAS1 gene, helping them thrive in low-oxygen environments. This variant appears in very high frequencies in Tibetans, but is rare or absent in neighboring lowland populations. Researchers traced its origin to Denisovans. A gene that evolved in an archaic population now helps modern humans survive in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The interbreeding evidence kept accumulating. In 2013, analysis of a bone from Denisova Cave revealed something extraordinary. The individual was a first-generation hybrid. Genetic analysis showed conclusively that this person, nicknamed Denny, had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Direct, incontrovertible evidence that these two archaic species didn't just coexist, but mated and produced viable offspring. If researchers found a first-generation hybrid in a tiny sample from a single cave, such events must have occurred many times. We know about Denny only because cool, stable conditions preserved DNA that almost never survives elsewhere.
This pattern of interbreeding isn't unique to humans. As genetic studies of other mammals have advanced, researchers have found widespread evidence of related species mixing. Grizzly bears well south into North America carry genes from polar bears, acquired through ancient hybridization when the two species ranges overlapped. European wolves have domestic dog DNA. Eastern coyotes now form populations with high fractions of wolf and domestic dog ancestry, creating hybrid populations across their range. What seemed exceptional for humans turns out to be common in mammals. We simply lacked tools to detect it until recently. Another surprise emerged from an unexpected source. At Cima de los Huesos in Spain's Atapuerca cave system, researchers studied Middle Pleistocene fossils dating to 400,000 years ago. The bones showed Neanderthal features. Everyone assumed these represented early Neanderthals. Then scientists extracted mitochondrial DNA from a femur, the oldest hominin DNA yet recovered. The sequences should have matched Neanderthals. Instead, they showed closer affinity to Denisovans from Siberia. 400,000-year-old fossils from Spain, with Neanderthal features carrying Denisovan-like mitochondrial DNA. The finding was shocking. It suggested relationships among archaic populations were even more tangled than suspected. Perhaps Neanderthals and Denisovans shared a more recent common ancestor. Perhaps there was gene flow between them early on. Perhaps populations weren't as neatly separated as diagrams suggested. The exact interpretation remains debated, but the message is clear. The genetic reality was messy, complicated, braided. Meanwhile, analysis of African genomes revealed their own surprises. Sub-Saharan Africans don't carry Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, but they do carry sequences from other archaic humans, previously unknown ghost populations that left no fossil trace but contributed genes to modern African populations. The evidence appears in DNA stretches highly divergent from typical modern human sequences, suggesting they split from the modern human lineage hundreds of thousands of years ago. Some researchers propose these ghost lineages might represent late surviving Homo heidelbergensis or related forms. Africa, where human evolution played out over millions of years, may have retained more diversity longer than previously thought. Modern humans didn't simply evolve in Africa and replace everyone else. They evolved while other archaic populations persisted, then mixed with those populations before spreading globally. And there are hints of yet another player, a fourth unknown lineage involved in the gene exchange game. Evidence suggests this fourth player was an ancient lineage that had been separate for probably over 1 million years, possibly Homo erectus or a related species. The identity remains mysterious, but the genetic signatures indicate our ancestors encountered and interbred with multiple archaic populations we haven't yet identified in the fossil record. The pattern emerging from all this genetic evidence resembles not a tree, but a network, a web of lineages that diverged, ran separately for hundreds of thousands of years, then reconnected through interbreeding. The braided stream metaphor captures this reality, separate channels flowing apart, then merging back together repeatedly across the landscape of time.
This contradicts fundamental assumptions about speciation. The biological species concept defines species as groups that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. If Neanderthals and modern humans could mate and produce fertile offspring, which they clearly could, should they be the same species? Yet they were morphologically distinct, separated for hundreds of thousands of years, genetically differentiated, occupying different geographic ranges and adapted to different environments. Perhaps the problem lies with how we define species, at least for organisms like us. Species boundaries may be fuzzier than we like to think, especially for closely related species separated for hundreds of thousands rather than millions of years. Small amounts of gene flow might continue even as populations follow largely independent evolutionary trajectories. What the genetic evidence shows unambiguously is that gene flow occurred and had evolutionary consequences. Neanderthal immune genes fighting infections, Denisovan genes enabling life at high altitude. These represent adaptive introgression, the technical term for when genes from one species cross into another and spread because they provide survival advantages. Modern humans didn't simply replace archaic humans. They absorbed them, incorporating locally adapted genes into expanding populations. A few percent Neanderthal ancestry might sound trivial, but that few percent could include genes tested and refined by hundreds of thousands of years of natural selection in Eurasian environments. For modern humans fresh from Africa, acquiring such genes through interbreeding provided shortcuts to adaptation. We are mongrels in the best sense, a blended lineage drawing on multiple sources, incorporating genetic wisdom of populations that spent millennia adapting to environments our African ancestors never experienced. The Neanderthal and Denisovan genes in our genomes represent evolutionary solutions field-tested over vast timescales, made available through ancient encounters. Every new ancient genome sequence adds detail. The story becomes more complex, not simpler, as we learn more. Just in the past 15 years, we've moved from thinking humans evolved separately to recognizing we're a braided lineage drawing from multiple archaic sources. The revolution continues. New discoveries emerge constantly. Techniques improve. Researchers extract DNA from older and more fragmentary specimens. The field moves at breathtaking pace. What changes is our understanding of human diversity and unity. Genetic differences between modern human populations are tiny, the result of merely tens of thousands of years of separation. Differences between modern humans and Neanderthals, separated for hundreds of thousands of years, were much larger. Yet even that divergence didn't prevent interbreeding or successful incorporation of archaic genes. The core message is clear. Human evolution was not the unfolding of a predetermined plan, not a march toward an inevitable endpoint, not even a simple branching tree. It was and remains a contingent process where separate lineages reconnect, where populations diverge and occasionally merge, where our ancestors met other kinds of humans and sometimes came together to produce children whose genetic legacy echoes in billions today.
Picture that braided stream again, channels separating and merging across the landscape. That's us. That's our history. Diverging lineages occasionally reconnecting, genetic material flowing between populations that were distinct yet not completely isolated. Neanderthals contributed genes to us. Denisovans contributed different genes. Unknown archaic populations contributed their own sequences. And we contributed our genes to some of them, as evidenced by modern human DNA in late Neanderthal genomes. The branches of the human family occasionally intertwined. The channels of the braided stream merged and separated repeatedly. This is the reality uncovered by genetic evidence, a reality far richer and more complex than any simple narrative could capture. We stand at the confluence of multiple ancient streams, our genomes carrying traces of encounters we can only imagine, moments when different kinds of humans met and their separate stories briefly became one. The story of human evolution shatters the comforting myth of linear progress. We are not the inevitable pinnacle of an upward climb, but one surviving twig on what was once a dense, tangled bush of human diversity. Multiple species walked the same shores, breathed the same air, and sometimes even came together to produce children whose genetic legacy lives on in us today. This braided history reveals something profound about what it means to be human. We carry within our DNA the wisdom of Neanderthals who endured Ice Age winters, of Denisovans who adapted to high altitudes, of ghost populations we may never identify from fossils. We are not pure, not separate, not superior. We are a blended lineage, shaped by chance encounters and contingent circumstances. Perhaps recognizing this humbles us in exactly the right way. We are one outcome among countless possibilities, currently successful but ultimately as temporary as any species evolution has produced. Thank you for listening.